Vladimir Putin can ride a bear, save people from wild Siberian tigers, take a dive in submarines, take a flight in fighter jets, ride a motorcycle, and show off his black belt judo skills. Everything about the Russian president is a publicity stunt. He's a typical modern politician who cares only about his public image but not about the vital interests of his own country. Welcome to the second episode of our series on Russia's role in world politics. I'm your host Kasim, and thanks for joining me for another KJ vid. If you missed the first episode, just scroll through our YouTube channel and you will be able to see it there. Just before we begin, please kindly visit our website kjvids.co.uk and subscribe to our subscription plan, which will help to keep us financially independent and produce more geopolitical reports. Since Vladimir Putin came to power 20 years ago, Russia has lost its influence in Georgia, the Balkans and Ukraine. Moscow shut down all of the Russian military bases abroad except in Syria, and NATO expanded to Russia's borders. In spite of these fatal losses, the Kremlin propagandists keep portraying Vladimir Putin as one of the greatest geopolitical geniuses of all time. In reality, however, the Russian president's approval ratings recently dropped to a historic level. The main reason is that Russia's trust in its president has drastically fallen due to controversial pension reforms as well as the declining economy. At the end of the last year, the Russian government announced its decision to raise the retirement age to just below the life expectancy of the average Russian man. According to new regulations, the Russian state pension age will be raised for men from 60 to 65 by 2028 and for women from 55 to 63 by 2034. According to statistics, the life expectancy for men at birth in Russia is 65.3, while for women it is 77 years. President Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin may have already lost the unfailing support of the Russian youths. It comes as no surprise that according to a poll conducted in December 2018, 41% of young Russians say they intend to emigrate. One of the main problems for the Russian leader is that he can no longer play the Crimea card at home for political gain. Even though the incorporation of Crimea into the Russian Federation in 2014 resulted in a sharp increase in the Russian president's approval ratings, 5 years later the matter has been overshadowed by widespread economic hardships. In addition, Crimea can hardly compensate for the loss of Ukraine. While Putin's predecessor Boris Yeltsin was in power, Russia held Ukraine in its geopolitical orbit. After the events in Kyiv's Maidan in 2013 to 2014, Russia lost its influence in Ukraine. Presently, Russia controls Crimea as well as eastern parts of the Donbas region, which is in total only about 7% of Ukraine. Putin also lost Georgia after the so-called Rose Revolution in Tbilisi in 2003. 5 years later, Russia fought and won a short war with the former Soviet Republic, which lost control over two breakaway regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Russia recognized these entities as independent states, but Georgia remained under the Western sphere of influence. Still, Putin's apologists tend to describe this as a huge victory. In their view, re-establishing control over Chechnya is another of Putin's great achievement. However, before the conflict erupted, ethnic Russians comprised approximately 20% of Chechnya's population. After Putin's so-called victory in 2000, the number of Russians in the Chechen Republic fell to less than 2%. Chechnya remains heavily subsidized by Moscow, with no hope of becoming economically self-sufficient in the current political climate. Apart from the losses in the former Soviet Union, Russia under Putin has lost its influence in the Balkans as well. In 2003, Russian peacekeeping troops were ordered by the Kremlin to leave both Bosnia, Herzegovina and Kosovo. Ever since, most Balkan countries either joined the EU and NATO or have been actively negotiating membership. Russia, on the other hand, shut down its military bases in Azerbaijan, Cuba, Georgia and Uzbekistan, while NATO came to the Russian borders after Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia joined the alliance in 2004. According to some Russian analysts, Vladimir Putin bears the responsibility for the Kursk submarine disaster. The nuclear submarine Kursk sank in the Barents Sea after explosions on board on August 12, 2000. about 3 months into Putin's first term. He was criticized for remaining on vacation in Sochi, only returning to the Kremlin 5 days after the sinking. It was a further 4 days before he travelled to the northern part of Murmansk, where the rescue operation was coordinated. As Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, critics say Putin was obligated to know about the fatal naval exercise, which was the largest in Russia's post-Soviet history. Many analysts praise Putin for his apparent economic success. From 1999 to 2008, Russian GDP grew by 94% and per capita GDP doubled. The value of the economy rose from $210 billion in 1999 to a peak of $1.8 trillion in 2008. However, this growth was linked to the global oil price. The 1998 crisis was caused by the collapse of oil prices on the back of an Asian crisis a year earlier. But by 2000, oil prices began to recover from their low of $10 per barrel and over the next decade climbed inexorably to a peak of about $150. Apart from oil and gas, and arms to a certain extent, Russia produces almost nothing relevant. Today, oil, natural gas, metals and timber make up 80% of Russia's exports. In spite of oil and gas revenues, Putin didn't take any measures in terms of re-industrialization of the Russian economy. Instead, the country remains dependent on the import of food and high technology. According to the official Russian statistics, ever since Putin came to power, over 25,000 schools have been permanently closed down, the vast majority of them in rural areas. Russian government officials explain that by shutting down schools, they're trying to increase efficiency in the education system. But at the same time, they're closing down hospitals. In the past 19 years, around 5,400 Russian hospitals have been shut down. If this process continues, in the next 4 to 5 years, Russia will have the same number of hospitals that it had in 1913. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia shut down over 1,000 airports. In 1991, Russia had 1,450 active airports, and in 2019 it has only 282, which is almost the same as the US state of Alaska that was sold by Russia to America in 1867. In spite of the declining economy and loss of political influence in many strategically important post-Soviet countries, many analysts try to portray Putin as a good Tsar who cannot make any radical change due to bad boyars who surround him. In reality, Vladimir Putin is merely a manager who is attempting to make a balance between various oligarchical groups and pro-Western liberals. Due to such power configuration, Russia has faced many tragedies and geopolitical humiliations in the past 20 years. It will likely face even more disasters in the coming years. But Putin doesn't have to fear for his position, since opposition in Russia barely exists. Biology is the only limiting factor for his power. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ vid. We hope you enjoyed the second episode of our series on Russia. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you are from Russia. Please also don't forget to subscribe on our website kjvids.co.uk to receive unlimited access to our news, analysis and reports. Also, if you missed episode 1, you can watch it on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching again and see you next time.